And now, the survival show that once survived, an 80s hairband love ballad stuck on repeat. In this episode, we have a little spooky fun and wax philosophically. Zombies, nonsense, or useful metaphor for modern survivalists? Howdy and welcome to the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 269. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. What's up, roving horde? It's going to be just you and I today. We're coming up on that spooky time of the year. Let's have a little fun with this episode. We'll dig in, shuffle, and shamble through zombies. How did zombies become such a prevalent metaphor in the survival community? I'll start with the genesis of my own infatuation. Stick around all the way through. This goes someplace interesting. Roughly 8 years ago, a friend insisted I read World War Z by Max Brooks. At first, I was reluctant. Zombie stuff just wasn't my jam since I'm not a fan of horror flicks and I was a serious survivalist. After some prodding, a lot of prodding, I came around and picked up a copy. A chapter into it, and I could not put the book down. I was hooked. Soon after, I plowed through several other related titles. What really got me besotted with zombie fiction was the similarities between real-world scenarios and the various things writers like Max Brooks and J.L. Bourne were churning out. What was even more interesting was the simple fact that zombies presented a near-perfect survival antagonist. The odds are against the survivors, but they're not completely insurmountable. It was then that I realized why so many people in and around the survival community had fallen in love with the genre and would say goofy expressions like, "When the zombies march." I then understood that, for enthusiasts, zombies had become a useful analogy and euphemism. If you simply replace zombie with economic collapse, pandemic, or natural disaster, you could still virtually have the same survival requirements. This is why it's so compelling in modern survival, and especially urban survival. It doesn't matter if we're talking about undead hordes or rioting mobs, the basics are the basics. What about planning, though? A friend of mine was once asked what his business plan was by a potential investor. With great pride and zeal, he responded, "My plan is to make a shit ton of money. That's my business plan." That did not work out so well for him or those dumb enough to get involved. A similar boneheaded approach wouldn't work for survival, be it zombies or anything else. While the best laid plans will never survive contact with the enemy, they still provide a roadmap to follow. A zombie survival plan wouldn't be much different from any other survival plan. It should be a well-considered, but not rigid, set of guidelines taking into considerations things like communications, food production, water procurement and processing, redundancy, retreat, etc. Plans need structure, but they should have enough room to breathe and allow for improvisation, and that still follows the spirit of the original plan. Simply saying, "my plan is a shitload of bullets," is not a plan, or at least not a well-considered one. Let's say we wrote the definitive guide to surviving the zombie apocalypse. The differences would only reside in the minutiae from a traditional survival guide. What would a zombie survival book tell you that a normal survival book could not or would not? A zombie survival handbook could give you specifics about different types of zombies and their behaviors, but then again, a good survival book discusses potential types of human aggressors and the situations, tactics, and strategies for dealing with them. When I first warmed up to the idea that I needed to do something to take more personal responsibility for my safety and the well-being of myself and my loved ones, I searched high and low. Someone had to have written an encyclopedia of survival, or maybe even a single book that was the end-all be-all to guide me through everything I could come up against. When it comes to an ultimate survival guide, I've never found one. Instead, I found a laundry list of books that offer ideas, techniques, and information that are applicable both generally and in specifics. You just have to read and read some more. Then there are kits. What would be so different? There are several classifications of survival kits. These are a system of kits rather than a single kit, as we discussed in a previous episode. There are blackout kits, bobs, EDC bags, go bags, and vehicle kits. Leaving your home is not always the best solution. Blackout kits are your zombie survival kit for bugging in. More often than not, just staying put is the answer, regardless of most of the situations. A blackout kit should contain all the necessary items in a convenient location needed to deal with immediate issues that come up when things get hairy. Bug out bags, commonly referred to bobs if you're new around here, are bags or kits that contain essential items for leaving the home in the most expedient manner possible and to reduce as much stress during that event as possible. The typical time requirement placed on a bob is that it should be able to get you through 72 hours of survival. The point is to get you from point A to point B alive. Everyday carry bags are for everyday use. For some, there is no difference between a bob and an EDC bag. For others who don't want to carry the kitchen sink around with them, these are lightweight pared back kits. They're meant to get you home from wherever you are rather than to get you from home to wherever you want to be. They're also for dealing with whatever pops up while away from home. Let's take a quick break for this vital message. Listener, do you get at least $3 a month worth of value out of I2H? You should see what we do for the Roving Horde Armada members. Check it out today by visiting I2H.net. Members receive access to the private I2H Armada Slack group where they get to connect, ask questions, get the news, escape the nonsense in their social media feeds, and shenanigans. Twice a month, members get together on a private virtual roundtable. We discuss guns, meat, news that matters, and other things you just can't talk about with anybody else. Access to members-only content and every episode ever produced. And that's just to name a few things you get with your membership when you sign up through I2H.net. In the Rabbit Hole is mostly kept on the air and supported by members just like you. Go to I2H.net to find out more and become part of the Roving Horde Armada. Now, what about an attack from a zombie? Surviving a zombie attack in most ways relates directly to surviving an attack from a human aggressor. Quick wit, quick feet, and excellent skills with your hands or weapons of your choice are your best hope. The real trick to surviving a zombie attack is the same as it would be for any other. Understand your opponent. Questions you have to know the answers to: what are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? How do my strengths and weaknesses compare and contrast with my enemies? What about weapons? Weapons to defend oneself in a zombie attack would be one of the few areas where things diverge from the standard fare a little more. Considering contemporary zombie fiction, some weapons might serve you well with humans, but would not necessarily do well against a zombie, and the need for honed skill, speed, and accuracy would be greatly heightened. The tactical pins, for example. Much of the focus with various techniques of using a tactical pin is on the nervous system, pressure points, and soft targets like the throat. None of these would be of any real use in defending against a zombie. Even conventional weapons like handguns and rifles have a limited effectiveness. The necessity for making a headshot puts much greater emphasis on skill than is attained by most people these days. This brings up an important point. Weapons are useless without the skill to use them. Anyone can pull a trigger, but to pull a trigger under pressure and have the bullets find their intended target is not likely to happen without consistent training and practice. Anyone can swing a machete, but without any training, it is not likely to land cleanly on the neck of a zombie and stave off the attack. So really, a lot of it is still the same, but it's a much greater emphasis on skill. Then there's gear. What would be so different about the gear you would need? You'd still have to cover the basic 8. They don't change. Now, survival gear is the downfall of most. It's not that people don't procure enough gear, but rather too much gear and not enough skill. Early on, I fell victim to the must-have gear bug. I spent endless hours painstakingly worrying about which knife was the right knife, which fire starter, which bag for my bob, and on and on and on. Here's the thing. Skill can usually compensate for a lack of gear, but an abundance of gear can't usually compensate for a lack of skill. This is not to say you should not focus on gear at all. Good gear is important. Focus on covering the basic 8 and don't go overboard. How about supplies? What really changes? Shelter, water, rest, food, health, security, contact, and information are the basic necessities. But if you have no quality of life, what's the point? Your supplies should take this into account. Now, I can live off whey protein, oatmeal, and dehydrated vegetables indefinitely, but can my mind survive it? Monotony kills the mind and soul. Entertainment becomes very important when riding out the zombie horde or any survival situation. When your mind is left unoccupied, your imagination fills the space. In Day by Day Armageddon, the main character makes it through the roughest of times by keeping his mind occupied through writing in a journal. He found the will to live, comfort, and even kind of companionship, and used it to solve problems. I'm not saying Dear Diary will save you in an economic collapse, civil war, or a zombie apocalypse, but having something to do and something to occupy your mind keeps that all-important attitude in check. For him, it was a diary. For you, it may be a deck of cards. It's not the same, but in a useful way. There is a point where real survival and zombies diverge, obviously. And this divergence of fantasy versus reality is actually useful. The euphemism of zombies makes having a conversation a little easier. It's far easier to say when the zombies march and sound like a dork than it is to say when X happens and sound like a tinfoil hat-wearing nutter. We can hypothesize about it, play with it, and it's all in good fun. There's another deep psychological point here. Zombie fiction gives modern preppers the opportunity to get close to their concerns without touching them outright. You remove the emotion from the conversation or thought experiment when you're merely speaking hypothetically. It's one thing to read a horrific story about zombies taking over the earth and humanity wrapped in a battle for our very existence. It's quite another to read a story about the collapse of a country and its citizens wrapped in a battle for their very existence. When you close the zombie book, the fight is over, or at least paused. It's easy to say, that could never happen, and dismiss the story enough to rest easy. This is much harder to do when the story hits closer to home. In the end, Zombies allow its readers to journey through a hypothetical sequence of events without the worry of getting consumed by them. What's the real takeaway here? In examining zombie apocalypse survival, you find that all the same principles really do apply. Have a plan, have supplies, have the skills, and above all else, have the right attitude. Put skills at the top of your list. With skills, you can always produce or procure supplies. With the right attitude, you can survive nearly anything. Without it, nothing else matters, as you simply lack the will to survive. Attitude or mental state is a topic I found to be emphasized in every reputable book on survival, yet it is one of the most glossed over topics by most survivalists. Here's the real takeaway. The basics are the basics are the basics. Nearly all survival scenarios share more in common than not. The differences are merely minutiae. And, thankfully, the zombie craze introduced a large mass of people to the idea of being prepared for whatever comes next. So stick with the basics. Let your zombie freak flag fly, and don't dismiss offhand what might be a fun thought experiment. And that's what I think about that. Damn it. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to do all the YouTube stuff. Like this video, subscribe, and slap that bell around because Cicada 3301 is a fascinating mystery. Show notes, links, and resources from this episode can be found by going to intherabbithole.com/E269. With that, we wrap up episode number 269. From the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.
West.